I gave everything to my 3 children. As I lay in a hospital bed, they laughed about my death and split my estate like I was already gone. I said nothing. Now they think I'm buried, while I watch from Europe, holding all the power. They say the hardest part of getting old is being forgotten. That's not true. The hardest part is realizing the ones you loved most never truly saw you. My name is Mabel Sinclair. I'm 68 years old, a widow, and until recently, a retired accountant living quietly in Charleston, South Carolina. I used to believe that being a good mother meant sacrifice. That if you gave everything, time, patience, love, your children would hold you in their hearts with the same reverence. But that belief died the day I overheard my children arguing about my estate as I lay sick in a hospital bed, too weak to open my eyes, yet too conscious to miss a single word. Before we get to that, let me take you back a bit. I married young. My husband, George, was a kind man, steady, respectful, and just boring enough to be safe. We lived modestly and raised 3 children in a 2-story colonial with white shutters and creaky floorboards that told you where everyone was at any time. George passed away 10 years ago, heart attack in his sleep. I grieved quietly, as I always did everything, and moved forward, working part-time in a small tax firm until I retired at 65. Life had slowed, but not in a bad way. I had my routines, my garden, my knitting group, and my church where I helped with bookkeeping and bake sales. And of course I had my children. Daniel, my oldest, is 42 now. Real estate agent, divorced twice, sharp dresser, always talking like he's closing a deal, even with his own mother. Kara, my middle child, runs a yoga studio. 39, always posting about chakras and self-love, but can't be bothered to visit unless she needs help with bills. And Josh, my baby. 36. Bartender and part-time musician. He calls me mama like he's still 10, but only when he needs something. I didn't see it back then, not the way they looked at me, like a vault waiting to be cracked open. I had always kept my finances neat and tidy. After George died, I managed everything myself. Over the years, I saved and invested. Nothing flashy, just smart planning. When I hit 68, I knew I had a little over $1.2 million in assets, some in property, some in savings, some in investments. And like any decent mother, I had planned to leave it equally to my children when I passed. I even told them once over Sunday lunch, everything's set. You'll all be taken care of. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe that planted the seed. Last fall, I caught a bad case of pneumonia. It hit me hard. I was rushed to Charleston Memorial after collapsing in my kitchen. I remember Rosa, my caregiver, finding me gentle, scared, calling my name like I was something precious. Rosa is 28, full of life, kind in the way you can't fake. She stayed with me until the ambulance came. After that, everything blurred. IVs, machines, nurses, cold rooms. It was the 3rd day in the hospital when I heard them. They didn't know I was awake. My eyes were closed, my body still, but my mind was sharp, clearer than it had been in days. I heard Daniel first, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk about the house," he said. "It's worth at least $600,000 in this market. I say we sell it and split the cash." Kara jumped in. "Or one of us could keep it. I've always loved that place. I could turn it into a retreat, yoga weekends, sound baths. Mom would have loved that." Josh laughed. "Right. Because Mom would want strangers doing headstands in her dining room. Just sell it. I need a down payment for a condo. And if she makes it out of this, we can just ease her into the idea." Silence. Then Kara whispered, "She's not going to make it. She's 70 soon and look at her. We might as well start planning." And Daniel added, almost like a joke, "She probably doesn't even know where she is anymore." I felt something inside me snap. Not loudly, not like a firecracker, but softly. Like the tearing of old fabric you've held onto too long. My children, my babies, weren't hoping I'd get better. They were circling like vultures. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just lay there, listening, letting the truth settle over me like dust on an unused shelf. They left the room soon after. Kara kissed my forehead, Josh patted my hand, Daniel straightened my blanket. All smiles, all warmth. All eyes. Rosa came in that evening and noticed my eyes open. "Senora Mabel," she said softly, brushing the hair from my forehead. "You're awake." I nodded. "I heard them, Rosa." She looked confused. "My children." Outside the room. Her face changed, something like pity, something like rage. "I'm sorry," she said. I shook my head. "No need. I should have seen it coming. That night I didn't sleep. I thought about George. What would he have done? Probably nothing. He trusted people too easily. But me? I've spent my life balancing numbers. You can only balance something that's off kilter. And this was wildly off. By morning, I had a plan. I called Eli Morrison, our old friend and lawyer. He'd helped me write my will years ago. A good man, smart and discreet. I asked him to visit, told him I needed to make some changes. When he came, I was already practicing. Slurred a few words, paused between thoughts, asked the same question twice. He leaned in. "Are you okay, Mabel?" "I'm just tired," I whispered. "Things get fuzzy sometimes." He understood right away. That's the thing about people like Eli, they know what's real and what's performance. We were alike that way. I told him I wanted to change everything. Every cent, every asset. I wanted to leave it to the people who actually cared. Rosa. My church. A scholarship fund for girls who want to be accountants like I was. "And the kids?" he asked gently. "They'll each get $1, I said. That's the price they put on love, after all. He didn't argue. I could tell he admired it. So we began. Quietly. Legally. Every document signed. Every move calculated. And as I started pretending to forget names, lose track of time, stumble over dates, they believed every second of it. Let them think I'm fading. Let them think the money is already theirs. They'll see. I kept the act going for weeks. Some days, I'd forget what day it was. Other days, I'd stare off like I was lost. I stopped correcting them when they talked down to me. Kara would bring me herbal teas and speak slowly, like I was a child. Daniel started handling my mail. "Just to help out," he said, and Josh kept asking if I'd considered giving him power of attorney. They didn't suspect a thing. Inside, I was sharper than I'd been in years. Rosa and Eli were the only ones who knew the truth. We met in secret, at the park, at the church office, once even in the back of Rosa's car. Eli brought documents. I signed. I rewrote my will, transferred property quietly, and made arrangements for what I was going to do next. We were careful. Everything was legal. Every line in the new will was ironclad. Meanwhile, I gave the performance of a lifetime. There was one afternoon. Daniel came by with a brochure for a long-term care home. "Just to have a look, Mom," he said, placing it gently on the coffee table. "They've got gardens and therapy dogs." "How lovely," I said with a sweet smile. "Can I bring my yarn?" He chuckled like I was adorable, not realizing I was mentally boxing up every piece of his manipulation and labeling it for what it was, betrayal. Later that week, I forgot my own birthday. They threw me a small party, more for show than sentiment. Kara live-streamed it to her yoga followers like I was some kind of inspiration. "Still glowing at 68, she captioned it. Meanwhile, she whispered to Josh when she thought I couldn't hear. "If she doesn't sign off soon, I swear I'm going to lose it." My own daughter. I had to bite the inside of my cheek not to laugh. The thing is, once you know someone's true heart, you can't unsee it. I had ignored the signs for years. The shallow phone calls. The visits only when convenient. The sighs when I asked for help with heavy groceries. I thought they were just busy. Now I knew better. But I wasn't angry. That's the part most people don't understand. I wasn't burning with rage or revenge. I was calm. Resigned, maybe. I had loved them deeply. And in their own way, perhaps they had loved me too, until my usefulness began to fade. What I felt now was not hate. It was clarity. And with that clarity came the need for justice, not for me, but for the woman I used to be, the one who cooked and cleaned and stayed up late worrying, who stitched Halloween costumes by hand and went without so they could have more. She deserved to be honored, not scavenged. The most difficult part of my plan was faking my decline in front of Rosa. She hated it. "You shouldn't have to lie," she'd say when we were alone. "I do," I'd reply. "It's the only way they'll show their true faces." "You sure you want to go through with all of it?" I always answered the same. Yes. By now, I had spoken to the church. Pastor Henry agreed to oversee the funds I'd set aside for the community programs. The Scholarship Foundation paperwork was in motion. The account for Rosa was ready, modest enough not to ruin her life, but large enough to change it if she used it wisely. I had watched her care for me when I was at my worst, never once asking for anything. That kind of loyalty? Rare. And worth every penny. Then came the last step. Disappearing. You can't fake a death without planning, especially when you're not actually dead. But Eli had connections. A cousin who worked in emergency services. A former nurse who owed him a favor. We didn't fake a body. That would be messy. We just made me vanish. One quiet Thursday morning, I left the house with a packed bag and didn't come back. Rosa reported me missing just before sunrise. She waited the right number of hours, called the police, gave them everything they needed, except the truth. By nightfall, the news had spread. Local woman 68 missing. They searched the riverbank near the park where I used to walk. They found my shawl near the edge, my shoes just beyond. The current was strong that week. People assumed the worst. There was no funeral at first, only questions. Days passed. Then, after a week, Eli called my children and told them he had reason to believe I was gone. There were no charges. No autopsy. No recovery. Just absence. The children gathered at my house, somber-faced, like a trio of performers waiting for the curtain to rise. Eli met them in the living room and unsealed the envelope marked Last Will and Testament of Mabel Sinclair. According to Rosa, the silence when he read the opening paragraph was so deep, you could hear the ceiling fan click. I, Mabel Sinclair, being of sound mind and heart, leave my estate as follows. Each child got exactly $1. Daniel demanded to see the rest. There is no rest, Eli told him. You've received your inheritance. Kara burst into tears. This has to be a mistake. Josh threatened to contest it. You're welcome to, Eli said calmly. But I assure you, all medical records will confirm that Mabel was fully competent when she made these changes. I have video evidence as well. They left angry, confused, betrayed, but only because their plan had failed. Rosa called me that night. I was already in Atlanta, using a temporary ID Eli had arranged, waiting for my flight to Rome. They looked like they'd seen ghosts, she said, laughing a little. They did, I replied. The ghost of their mother's disappointment. I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. I was free. You might wonder how a woman like me at 68 could vanish and start a new life. But the truth is, when you've spent your whole life taking care of others, it's not hard to disappear. It's just hard to choose to. I had chosen. And my next stop? Italy. But before I boarded that flight, I had one last thing to do. A small gesture. A final word. A little truth, delivered with elegance. 3 postcards handwritten in blue ink, one for each child. No return address. Just a message. Dead to you. Alive to the world. Signed, Mom. Italy greeted me with a quiet kind of warmth, like the world had been holding its breath until I stepped into it. I landed in Rome, slipped into a taxi, and told the driver in broken Italian, "Centro Storico, please." He smiled, nodded, and drove me through winding streets filled with crumbling beauty. My little hotel was tucked between a bakery and a bookstore, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I checked in under the name Margaret Bly, a name I hadn't used since childhood. My mother once told me I was nearly named Margaret before they settled on Mabel. It seemed fitting now, a way to reclaim the girl I used to be before I became only someone's wife, someone's mother. The hotel clerk didn't ask questions. He handed me the key, wished me a good stay, and left me to my new life. The first few days passed in a dream. I wandered the cobbled streets of Rome with no destination. I stood in front of the Colosseum and thought of how many empires had risen and fallen, how many people once thought themselves immortal. I visited old churches, lit candles for nobody in particular, and let the silence speak to me. One morning, I ordered a cappuccino and a pastry and sat watching people walk by. A little boy was trying to chase pigeons while his father laughed and called him back. An old couple held hands as they slowly crossed the plaza. There was no rush, no schedule, no performance. Just life moving forward. And I thought, this is what I was missing all those years. Back home, everything had been duty. Lists. Grocery runs. Balancing accounts. Birthday cards. Doctor appointments. And while I don't regret being a mother, because I gave it everything, I now saw how easily I'd let that role consume me. I had allowed myself to vanish behind their needs. And in the end, what did that devotion earn me? A conversation in a hallway about who gets what. That memory still floated in my chest like smoke. I tried not to breathe it in too deeply. A week after arriving in Italy, I sent the postcards. I sat at a little desk in my hotel room and chose each card carefully. One had the Colosseum bathed in golden light. Another showed the Trevi Fountain. The third, a sunlit vineyard in Tuscany. I wrote the same message on each. Dead to you. Alive to the world. I signed them simply, Mom. I didn't write anything else. They didn't deserve explanations. They didn't deserve closure. At the post box, I hesitated for a moment. Not out of doubt, but from the weight of what I was doing. This was final. There would be no return flight. No Christmas cards. No more pretending. These weren't just postcards. They were tombstones to the version of me they thought they owned. I dropped them in. And I walked away. Days turned into weeks. I traveled north to Florence, where the art nearly broke me. I stood in front of Botticelli's The Birth of Venus and wept. Not because of its beauty, though it was beautiful, but because it reminded me of how much I'd forgotten to feel. In Venice, I stayed in a quiet apartment by the canal, listening to the water lapping at the foundation while gondolas glided past my window. I ate alone in cafes, wrote pages in a little leather notebook Rosa had gifted me before I left, and rediscovered what it meant to be with myself, not just by myself. Occasionally I thought about them, Daniel, Kara, Josh. I imagined their faces when they read the will. The way Daniel probably stood up and pointed fingers. Kara crying dramatic tears. Josh storming out to smoke. I wondered if they blamed each other, or if, in some ironic twist, they had finally found something to unite them. But I didn't dwell on them long. They had chosen their path. And now, I was finally choosing mine. There was one night in Venice I'll never forget. I had wandered into a small bookstore near the Rialto Bridge. It smelled of old paper and lemon oil. An older gentleman behind the counter nodded at me and let me browse. I picked up a copy of The Little Prince, in English, thank goodness, and sat down on a cushion in the corner. As I read, a young woman entered the shop, talking quietly with the owner in Italian. I couldn't understand everything, but I caught enough. She was asking if they had any books about accounting. The owner shook his head and offered her something else, but she smiled, thanked him, and turned to leave. Something in me stirred. "Scusa," I said, getting to my feet. "Do you speak English?" She turned, surprised. "Yes, a little. You're looking for books on accounting?" She nodded. "I'm studying. I want to open a small business. I help my mother now, but I want to learn. How do you say? Finance." I smiled. "It's a good field. I was an accountant for 40 years. Her eyes lit up. "Really?" We talked for almost an hour. Her name was Alessia. She was 23, living with her mother, saving every euro she could. She reminded me of myself at that age, sharp, determined, a little nervous. When she left, she thanked me and said, "Maybe one day I be like you." After she left, I sat there holding the book, thinking about how far I had come. Not just the miles, but the life. And I realized something. Revenge had never been the real goal. Justice, maybe. But more than that, freedom. Not just from my children, but from the idea that I needed them to matter. I didn't. The world still had room for me. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had my own. I closed the book, paid the owner, and stepped back into the night air. The canal shimmered under the moonlight, and for the first time in decades, I felt whole. Back in Charleston, I imagined life had returned to its regular speed. The search for me had probably gone cold. The inheritance had settled. The house was likely sold or sitting untouched. My name might still get whispered in some coffee shop corners, but soon even that would fade. Let it. I had no plans to return. Rosa and Eli sent updates through a secure email Eli had set up before I left. Rosa had started taking night classes in nursing, paid for by the portion I'd left her. She told me once in an email, "You saved me, Mabel. I will never forget it." I wrote back, "No, dear. You saved me first." The church used the funds to build a community kitchen. I saw photos in one email. Children laughing, volunteers cooking, the pastor smiling as he cut a ribbon. My money had found its way to purpose, not greed. The scholarship was up and running, too. The first recipient had already been chosen. A 17-year-old girl named Trinity with a dream of becoming a CPA. Eli sent me a copy of her essay. She wrote about growing up with nothing and wanting to prove that girls from her neighborhood could be more than statistics. I cried when I read it, not from sadness, but from knowing I had finally given something that mattered. As for my children, I didn't ask, and I didn't care to know. Venice was lovely, but after a while, the stillness of the water made me restless. So I moved again, this time to a small coastal town called Manarola in Cinque Terre. Pastel-colored houses clung to the cliffs like they were holding their breath, and the sea crashed below with a rhythm that felt like freedom. I rented a modest room above a family-owned cafe. The woman who owned it, Bianca, took a liking to me right away. She spoke little English, but kindness doesn't need translation. "Vidova?" she asked one morning, noticing I never mentioned a husband. I nodded. "Vidova," I replied. She placed her hand on her heart and said, 40 le viduve. Strong, the widows. I liked that. Each morning, I'd walk along the cliffside paths and watch the sun rise over the Ligurian Sea. I started painting, just watercolors at first, nothing fancy, flowers, rooftops, the sea. I wasn't good, but it didn't matter. No one was grading me anymore. I had nothing to prove. Sometimes I thought about what would have happened if I'd just gone on as before. recovered from pneumonia, gone home, and let my children keep circling me like buzzards waiting for the end. I could have played nice, smiled, handed over the estate, and died a silent woman, forgotten not long after the last check cleared. But I didn't. And for that I felt no regret. Not a flicker. You see, there's something no one tells you about being old. You don't lose your intelligence. If anything, it sharpens. You've seen so much, survived so much, that you can see lies before they're spoken. You can smell manipulation like it's perfume. The only thing that changes is that people stop listening. And that's exactly what my children did. They stopped seeing me, stopped listening, stopped caring. So I made sure they'd remember me for the rest of their lives. One afternoon, while having espresso on the terrace, I received an encrypted message from Eli. It was short. Your children have gone to the press. I laughed. Actually laughed. There I was, an old woman in a town that looked like a painting, sipping espresso while my entitled children were airing their dirty laundry to the local news. Eli sent me a clip from a Charleston station. Daniel stood at the podium, wearing a gray suit and the face of a grieving son. We were blindsided, he said. We don't know why our mother would do something so extreme. She wasn't herself. She must have been manipulated. Josh sat beside him, arms crossed, nodding. Kara cried on cue, clutching tissues and looking fragile in front of the cameras. They weren't grieving. They were performing, claiming I had been coerced, suggesting I was mentally unfit, threatening legal action against Eli, against Rosa, against anyone who stood in the way of them getting what they believed was theirs. Eli handled it beautifully. He held a calm press conference, provided notarized documents, video testimony, and medical records confirming my full mental clarity during every legal change. He didn't attack them. He simply told the truth piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to stand on but their own shame. The decision was entirely hers, Eli said. She was of sound mind and deeply thoughtful. The distribution of her estate was not an accident. It was a statement. A few days later, I received another message. Lawsuit dropped. Public backlash strong. They're quiet now. I didn't smile this time. I felt tired. Not from fear, not from guilt, just from the weight of it all. When I walked down to the cafe that evening, Bianca noticed my mood. She sat with me and poured 2 glasses of wine. She didn't ask questions, just sat quietly while the sea wind tugged at our hair. After a while, she said, La famiglia, può ferire più di chiunque. Family can hurt more than anyone else. I nodded. Yes, they can. There's a peculiar kind of sorrow that comes with being betrayed by your own flesh and blood. It's not sharp. It doesn't cut you open all at once. It's slower, like water wearing down stone. You don't feel the damage until you've crumbled. And yet, I didn't feel broken. I felt reshaped. A new version of myself, made not by them but in spite of them. About a week later, I received an email from Rosa. She had passed her first nursing exam and started volunteering at a women's shelter twice a week. I want to help women who feel forgotten, she wrote. Like I used to. I responded. You were never forgotten. You were just waiting to be seen. Rosa had become more than a caregiver to me. She was like the daughter I never had, the kind who saw me, not my bank account, not my house, not my legacy. Just me. And somehow, across all those long hours of illness and recovery, we'd built something real. Something that money couldn't buy and betrayal couldn't break. Around the same time, I received the first newsletter from the Scholarship Foundation. They called it the Mabel Sinclair Women in Finance Award. I hadn't asked them to name it after me, but I was touched. In the first round, they'd helped 5 young women enroll in college. Each one with a story that reminded me why I had done what I did. One wrote in her thank you letter, I will become a woman who understands money, not one who fears it. Thank you for believing in women like me. That line made my chest ache. It felt like something had been repaid, not by my children but by the world. A few days later, a letter arrived from Eli. A real letter on paper. He wrote, I hope you're finding peace in all this. I know it wasn't easy, but justice rarely is. You've made a mark, Mabel. Not many people can say that truthfully. He ended with a note. There's talk of a book deal. Someone wants to write about what happened. I'll forward details if you're interested. I folded the letter and placed it in my journal. Let them write it, I thought. Let the world hear the truth. Not the sob story of 3 kids who lost their inheritance, but the story of a woman who reclaimed herself in the face of betrayal. One evening, while sketching the sea from my terrace, I saw a couple arguing on the street below. The woman looked worn down. tired in a way I recognized. The man stormed off and she stood there, still and small, like she didn't know where to go next. I climbed down the stairs, walked outside, and handed her a small notebook and a pen. "What is this?" she asked in broken English. "A place to put your truth," I said. "So no one else writes it for you." She looked at me, eyes full of confusion and maybe a little hope. I just smiled. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was haunted, but because I was full. Full of everything I had lost, everything I had gained, and everything I had left to give. There are moments in life when you feel the past tugging on your sleeve, asking you to look back. Even in the most beautiful places, even after you've put oceans between you and everything you left behind, memories find their way through. In Manarola, I had found peace, or something close to it. My days had rhythm. Morning walks along the cliffs, coffee at Bianca's cafe, afternoons painting, evenings writing letters I never sent. Sometimes I would sit by the sea and just breathe, letting the salt air remind me I was still alive, still here, still choosing this life on my own terms. But peace, I've learned, doesn't mean the past goes quiet. It just changes the way it speaks to you. One morning, I opened my encrypted inbox and saw a message from Eli. Short, direct. "Your children want to meet. In person." I stared at the screen for a long time before I moved. I didn't open it right away. I just let the idea of it sit there. Why now? Hadn't I made myself clear? Hadn't the will, the lawsuit, the silence said enough? Still, curiosity itched at me. After an hour, I finally read the message. "They're not asking for money," Eli wrote. "They say they want answers. If you're willing, I'll arrange a neutral location. Your call." My first instinct was no. A firm, hard no. But then I thought about all the things they never got to hear. All the things I never said, not because I was afraid, but because they never truly listened. And maybe, just maybe, this was the last thread to tie off. I told Eli to proceed on one condition. I would meet them once, in one location of my choosing, and I would say what I needed to say. No arguments. No shouting. No begging. Just truth. He agreed. 2 weeks later, I flew to a quiet town just outside Geneva, Switzerland. I chose it because it was neutral in every way, geographically, emotionally, symbolically. A place with no history between us, no memories to haunt the air. I stayed in a small inn with pale green shutters and a garden out back. Eli booked a private room in a library for the meeting. I liked that, a room full of books. At least the walls would be full of stories that mattered. When I walked in, they were already seated. Daniel looked older, tired in a way money couldn't fix. Kara's face was pinched, her eyes wary. Josh looked nervous, like he'd practiced what he wanted to say, but now couldn't remember a word. None of them stood. I took the chair opposite them, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Daniel spoke first. "We just wanted to understand," he said. "Why you did what you did." I tilted my head slightly. "You mean why I left you each $1?" His jaw clenched. "You know what I mean." I looked at each of them, one by one. For a moment I said nothing. I let the silence stretch just enough to make them squirm. "I heard you," I said finally. "That day in the hospital. Every word." Josh shifted in his seat. Kara's eyes dropped to the floor. "You thought I was unconscious. You thought you could say whatever you wanted because I was too weak to hear you. But I did. I heard everything. The jokes. The planning. The assumption that I wouldn't make it." Kara opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. "No. You'll listen now." They fell silent. "I spent my entire life giving to you. Not just money. Everything. My time. My health. My sleep. My dreams. I gave you holidays, traditions, safety, comfort. I gave until there was almost nothing left of me. I leaned forward. And when I needed you most, you stood outside my hospital room and calculated my value like vultures around a carcass." Daniel's eyes flashed with something, maybe shame, maybe resentment. "We didn't mean." "You meant exactly what you said," I interrupted. "And maybe you didn't say it with malice. Maybe you were just scared. But what matters is you didn't see me as your mother. You saw me as a prize. And that changed everything." Josh cleared his throat. "We just thought you'd always be there. You were always so strong, Mom. We didn't know how to deal with it." "That's the thing," I said. "You never asked me how I felt. You never checked if I was okay. You assumed my strength meant I didn't need kindness." Kara looked up. "So you disappeared? You faked your death to teach us a lesson." I shook my head. "No. I disappeared because I didn't want to die watching my life be devoured by ungrateful hands. I wanted to live. And I couldn't do that around people who saw my death as a solution." A long silence followed. Then Daniel leaned forward, voice low. Do you hate us? That question surprised me. I sat back, thinking carefully. No, I don't hate you. I pity you. Because you've built your lives around taking instead of giving. Around expecting instead of appreciating. I don't hate you. But I don't trust you. And I don't owe you anything. Josh's voice cracked. So what do we do now? I looked at him for a long moment. You live with the choices you made. Just like I lived with mine. You find your own way forward. I gave you every tool I had when I raised you. If that wasn't enough, then you'll have to learn on your own. Kara wiped her eyes. Will we ever see you again? I stood slowly, gathering my coat. No. They didn't stop me. I walked out of that room lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because it was easy, but because it was finished. There would be no more pretending. No more hoping they'd change. I had said what needed to be said. And that was enough. Back in Manarola, the sea welcomed me like an old friend. I returned to my morning walks, my painting, my coffee with Bianca. I never told her where I went or what happened. She didn't ask. One evening, I sat at the edge of the cliff, watching the sunset bleed into the waves. A little girl ran past with a kite, her laughter chasing the wind. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salt air, the light, the freedom. I thought of the 3 people I brought into the world, and all the love I gave them. And I thought of the 3 young women in the scholarship program who were now building something beautiful from the foundation I left behind. And I smiled, because sometimes letting go is not the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. It's strange the way peace becomes a rhythm. In the beginning, it felt like a luxury, like something I had borrowed but might have to return. But over time, it settled in my bones. In Manarola, peace wasn't something I had to chase. It was in the small things, a steaming cup of strong coffee, the sea air brushing against my skin, the sound of the waves against stone, and the quiet hum of a town that didn't expect anything from me. I was no longer Mabel Sinclair, the accountant, the widow, the mother of 3. I was just Mabel. Just a woman with time, breath, and a second chance. Some mornings I would wake before sunrise and sit on the terrace, wrapped in a shawl, watching the sky change color. The town would still be asleep, save for the fishermen preparing their boats. I loved those hours. Nobody knew me, nobody needed me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about that. I painted more. Landscapes mostly. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, just capture what I saw, moments of calm, slices of light. Bianca's granddaughter, Sophia, took a liking to my art. She'd visit after school and sit beside me while I painted. Sometimes she'd ask questions, but mostly she just watched in silence. I gave her a small watercolor set and told her to try it herself. Her eyes lit up like Christmas lights. Sei una vera artista, Signora Mabel, she said once. You are a real artist. I smiled. Just someone who finally has the time to see things clearly. In the quiet, I found reflection. And reflection has a way of gently pulling you back to the places you avoided. Sometimes I'd dream about the old house in Charleston, the one I left behind. The hallway with the creaky floorboard. The smell of cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. The framed photos I once dusted with pride. All ghosts now. There was one photo I used to keep in the hallway. It was of the 5 of us, me, George, and the kids at Myrtle Beach. Daniel had his arm around Kara. Josh sat in George's lap, all teeth and curls. I was smiling, but my eyes were somewhere else, already worrying about lunch, sunscreen, and making sure no one drowned. I used to think that was just motherhood. Constant worry. Constant work. But now I realized it was also constant erasure. I was always behind the camera or cleaning up the mess. I gave my youth to that family. And in return, I got silence and a room full of whispers when they thought I was dying. But here's what they never understood. I never wanted their money. I wanted their care. Their attention. A call just to ask how I was doing. A hand to hold when I felt tired. Not out of obligation, but out of love. They gave me none of it. So I gave them the truth. And the freedom to build something different, if they chose to. A few months after the meeting in Geneva, I received another email from Eli. This one was more personal. You were right to go, he wrote. They've stopped calling. Stopped asking. The world has moved on. But I think deep down they haven't. I wrote back, that's their journey now. I'm no longer part of the map. Rosa wrote to me too. She was finishing her final semester. She sent pictures of her in scrubs, her face glowing with pride. She told me she was applying to a nursing program in New York. I want to work in a women's clinic, she wrote. Help women who have no one. I replied, you've always been that person, Rosa. The degree is just a paper. You've had the heart for it all along. She called me Mama Mabel in her next email. It caught me off guard. made my throat tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I sat with that name for a long time, tracing the weight of it. It wasn't meant to replace anything. It was a new title, one born from choice, not blood. And somehow it felt more real. One day, while walking along the marina, I saw a young mother struggling with her toddler. He was screaming, tossing his snack on the ground, refusing to be picked up. She looked exhausted. I offered her a tissue and a soft smile. She accepted both with tired eyes. "Does it get easier?" she asked me in hesitant English. I thought for a moment before answering. "It doesn't. But one day they stop crying in public and start hurting you quietly." She blinked, surprised, maybe a little amused. "But if you're lucky," I added, "you'll raise someone who turns around and says thank you." She looked down at her child, then back at me. "Did you?" I didn't answer. She nodded, like she understood more than I gave her credit for. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that question. "Did you?" I thought about Daniel, Kara, and Josh. Where they were. If they were doing well. If they still hated me. Or if they'd finally let go of the fantasy that they were owed anything more than what I gave them. Maybe, deep inside, I did want to thank you. Not a parade. Just one honest word. But you can't wring gratitude out of someone who doesn't want to feel it. And you can't keep waiting for something that never comes. Eventually, you have to close the door and leave the porch light off. Still, I lit a candle that night. Not for them. For me. For the woman I used to be. The one who held that family together through sleepless nights, budget dinners, scraped knees, and broken hearts. The woman who swallowed her hurt, so her children could grow up soft. The woman who once believed that loyalty meant silence. She deserved more than she got. And now, finally, she was getting it, not from them, but from herself. A few days later, I painted a piece I called The Quiet Woman. It was a silhouette of a figure sitting at the edge of a cliff, the sea behind her, her face turned toward the sun. No features. Just calm. I signed it M. and gave it to Bianca to hang in her cafe. "It's beautiful," she said, hugging me. "Like you." I didn't correct her. Because maybe now I believed it too. The truth is, I'm not waiting anymore. Not for closure. Not for forgiveness. Not for someone to finally understand what I gave up to be the person they needed. I'm living. And that's the best revenge of all. The days move slower now, but not in the way they used to. It's not the kind of slow that weighs on you or makes you restless. It's a gentler kind of time, the kind that invites you to notice the details. The way sunlight falls across cobblestones, how birds take their time choosing which branch to land on, how people speak with their hands here, even when words are too many or too few. I spend most mornings by the sea. My favorite bench faces the open water. Some days I bring a book. Most days I bring nothing at all. Just myself. That's enough now. Every so often I'll see a couple walking by, young, arms linked, unaware of the years ahead. Or a mother struggling with a crying baby, so tired she looks ready to dissolve. I used to want to reach out, offer advice or a word of comfort. But now, I've learned to let people have their journey. Just as I had mine. Because that's what life really is, isn't it? A long, winding road of discovery, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful, but always yours. My road took an unexpected turn the day I heard my children plan my death. That moment, as much as it hurt, didn't break me. It freed me. It showed me that I had given too much of myself to people who only saw the surface. And instead of withering in the sadness of that truth, I chose to build something better with it. Justice wasn't in punishing them. It was in saving myself. And maybe in saving a few others along the way. The scholarship program continues to grow. Every semester, I receive an update from the foundation. More young women, more dreams being nurtured. Trinity, the first recipient, just passed her CPA exam. Her email made me cry, tears I didn't even know were sitting there, waiting to fall. "You changed my life," she wrote. Not just with the money, but with the belief. I saved that message. I printed it out and folded it into my journal. I read it on days when the past echoes too loudly. Rosa, too, continues to bloom. She's now a full-time nurse in New York, working at a clinic that serves women in underserved communities. We exchange letters now and then, handwritten the old-fashioned way. Her handwriting is still large and loopy, filled with warmth. She signs her letters with "Love, your Rosa." She sends me pictures sometimes, of the clinic, of the women she helps, of herself with a stethoscope around her neck and pride in her eyes. She always asks when I'll come visit. Maybe someday. But not just yet. As for Daniel, Kara, and Josh, I haven't heard from them since that meeting in Geneva. There have been no more emails, no legal threats, no news articles. Just silence. And I'm content with that. I used to wonder what they told people when asked about me. Did they say I passed away? Did they twist the story to fit a more comfortable truth? Maybe they told the version that painted me as cold, vindictive, or mentally unwell. Or maybe, just maybe, they started to look inward and see the parts they played. But I've stopped needing to know. That chapter is closed. The story written, bound, and shelved. Sometimes when I look at the horizon, I wonder how many other women have lived like I did, giving everything, asking for little, disappearing behind the needs of others. I think of how many quietly hoped for recognition that never came. I think of the women who died with full hearts but empty voices. And I feel lucky, because I got to write the ending myself. A few weeks ago, I met a man named Luca. He's 71, a retired teacher who runs a tiny bookstore 2 villages over. He wears mismatched socks and smells like pipe tobacco and old books. We met when I wandered in looking for a new journal. He offered me espresso and recommended a poetry collection. We've been having lunch every Tuesday since. He doesn't ask too many questions. I like that about him. We talk about art, about weather, about nothing in particular. It's the kind of companionship I never knew I wanted. Light, easy, unburdened by past expectations. The other day, he asked me if I'd ever been married. I said. He passed a long time ago. Children, he asked. I paused, then answered truthfully. Once. But I'm not part of their story anymore. He nodded, not pressing. He simply poured more wine and said, sometimes family isn't blood. Sometimes it's who brings you peace. That line stayed with me. Because it's true. My family now is different. It's Bianca, who sneaks me extra pastries when she thinks I look too thin. It's Sophia, who shows me her latest paintings and believes I'm a genius. It's Rosa, who calls me Mama Mabel and sends me postcards from Harlem. And maybe in some gentle, quiet way, it's Luca, who sits beside me without needing me to be anything more than who I am. There's no moral to my story. No big revelation. Just this. Don't wait to be loved the way you deserve. Don't give so much of yourself that there's nothing left to reclaim. And if the people who should see you don't, walk away. You're not a tree. You're allowed to move. I look at the life I've built here, the calm I've created, and I know one thing for certain. I didn't run away from my life. I ran toward it. And I arrived. Not the same woman who left Charleston, but the one I was always meant to become. Sometimes I still think about that hospital bed, the beeping machines, the hushed voices just beyond the curtain. That was my funeral, in a way. That was where the old me was laid to rest, not by death, but by truth. And what came after? Not revenge, not regret, but rebirth. So if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, wondering if it's too late to begin again, hear this from me, a woman who lived a full life and then started over at 68. It is never too late, and you are never too old to become someone new. You just have to be brave enough to let go, and kind enough to begin. That's my story, and I lived every word of it.